Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio. Today I'm joined by my good friends Stephen Mehler and Brien Foerster. And we've got a very interesting show today. Unusual because we have all met each other in Egypt recently on tour. Did some Capricorn TV interviews, and I want to talk a little bit today about the Khemitology tour that we were on. Also, we've got some interesting updates and discoveries we're going to talk about. So let me tell you about today's guest if you're not familiar, Stephen Mehler. He has spent 30 years researching the answers to these questions. Was there an advanced prehistoric civilization in ancient Egypt? Who were the people behind the Great Pyramids? Who carved the Great Sphinx? Did the pyramids serve as energy devices and not as tombs for the kings? Mehler believes the answer are a definitive yes. An indigenous oral tradition still exists in Egypt, and he's been able to uncover and study it with the help of a living master of this tradition, Mr. Abdel Hakim Awiyan. And I've also met the Awiyan family, the descendants of Abdel Hakim, and Stephen has done a wealth to bring this knowledge to the forefront and has embraced the Awiyan family and the Khemitology tradition, which is what we're going to get into some of today. And he's also been given the permission to share these teachings. I think that's the key thing to talk about. And of course, Stephen's wrote 2 books, and From Light into Darkness, and these important works of bringing this knowledge to the forefront. Of course, the Land of Osiris as well. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Brien Foerster. Brien is no stranger to radio and TV. He's an adventurer, guide, and author of 12 books now. He's also been a regular in Ancient Aliens and has been a study of native cultures from childhood. He's a resident in Cusco, and he's learned the many ancient megalithic sites there, including Machu Picchu, the most famous, obviously, and Brien looks into the Inca, typically dated 600 to 1,000 years ago, but also looks into this pre-Inca civilization, perhaps echoes of Atlantis, going back perhaps even 10,000 years. And without further ado, let's bring on our guest today. Hi, Stephen. Hi, Brien.
Hello, James.
Hi, James.
Wow, good to talk. Yeah, you too, guys. It's good to talk to you again. And I guess we'll talk Stephen first. It was nice to meet you guys in Egypt, Stephen and Brien, and great to have a TV interview with you as well on the Giza Plateau overlooking the Sphinx. That's people can get that on the Capricorn TV channel. However, we did do a bit of a tour. I joined you on the start of the Khemitology tour, Stephen. It was great to do that. I know I went for the Capricorn TV interviews, but it was nice to see the start of the tour. A shame I couldn't make the whole lot of it, but tell us about the Khemitology tour, Stephen. The stuff that you continued on southern Egypt and many other places, but tell us about the Khemitology tour this time, 2014 in general, and how it went.
Yes, well, I would like to mention for the audience to know that just to update the bio a little bit, it's almost 50 years now that I've been researching this.
50, Stephen.
And I want to say that I have been interviewed on radio and television over the last 20 years, almost 20 years. And I have met very few of the people who have interviewed me. Very few. But you are the only one that we have ever had who has interviewed me, or even Brien, I would imagine, who's actually come out in the field with us.
Oh.
And that is very significant. The fact that you were a member of the Khemitology tour, and that you were out in the field with us, and that you saw how we operate, how we work all together. And that's very significant. So it's very special for me to talk to you now. And to continue with, after you left, you were there the first day. We were out on the Giza Plateau together. We took a group photo with you, which was great. We feature in the Khemitology tours. We say to people who come to us on guests that they are not just passive witnesses, that they're actively to take part in our tours. And this is a perfect example from this tour. Because we were a small group, and as you noticed, James, there were hardly any tourists in Egypt at the time.
Empty.
So we had the sites basically to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We had maximum access this time to look at things, examine things, like I could say for myself, never before, in 22 years of going to Egypt, did I have the access we had this time. So, just to bring that up to date, we had one guest on our tour, a fellow from Australia named Richard Clark. We say to our people who come with us that you have to look at things. We teach you how we look at things, what we're looking for, evidence of ancient technology or past previous civilization. So, Richard, on this tour, found two significant things. This tour, we feature that we found 4 things that were we have never seen before. And 3 are very significant. One I will concentrate on because it deals with our tour with Peru, too. But Richard Clark found 2 objects for us as part of our tour. He found the largest drill hole in rose granite that we have ever found at the Temple of Karnak. It's was in front of our eyes. We had never seen that before because Richard came as a man who was interested in these things, not just to be passive, but to be using his eyes, his senses. He found things for us. He also found at the Aswan Quarry, where we find all the rose granite that was used in ancient Kemet, he found the outline of a rose quartz statue of a king, probably, of someone that was totally made in situ and removed. Yusuf and I remarked to ourselves, we had looked at that before, but we had never really realized what it was. So the point is that the tourists that come with us on tour are part of the group. They're part of the Kemet school. They immediately get a background that we give them, what to look for, what we're looking for, what we're doing out in the field. And they help us. They find things significantly. So there was one thing that we'll discuss in detail, and I'll let you go on, maybe talk to Brien.
Sure.
Because we want to talk about one specific thing we found at the very end of the tour, which may link Peru and ancient Kemet. And we want to talk about that.
Sure. Let's bring Brien in for a minute. Before I do, actually, a big shout out to Richard Clark because I think Richard had listened to Brien's show with myself and became a Capricorn member, and as a result of that ended up getting onto the Khemitology tour. So it's a small group and it's nice. I was just so pleased to meet somebody else from my own radio show in Egypt. I was like, I'm blown away by that, but big shout out to Richard and great. I wasn't aware that he had found some stuff. So I guess this is why we're doing the show today, Stephen, to do an update. So Brien, great to have you back. Great to have met you in Egypt, out in the field, as we say. And, tell us about the tour for you, Brien. What happened for you? How did you feel? This is your second time, I believe.
It was, and it was a much more profound experience because my first trip, which was last year, like anyone who visits a place for the first time, you really can only get a glimpse into the ancient culture because your eyes are constantly looking at the large structures which you've seen since childhood. So for the first tour, I learned a fair bit, but it was on the second trip where I was able to focus my senses and especially my eyes towards more subtle aspects. And so through that, we were able to find many more examples of lost ancient high technology than we had found, I believe, on the first trip.
Wow. Of course, yeah, finding your feet the first time, I think, Brien, and I know you're very interested in lost technologies. Again, I know you work closely with Chris Dunn as well, and I guess you're looking stone carving techniques, Brien, techniques for moving or cutting or quarrying or stuff like that?
Yeah, definitely. The difference between Peru and Egypt is that in Egypt we saw extremely obvious examples of high-speed drills being used and also high-speed, very large saws up to at least 8 meters in diameter being used, whereas in Peru the ancient technology that was used appears to be different but equally as sophisticated and complex.
Of course, you're primarily focused in Peru, Brien. You've been doing great research there on the megaliths there. I can see why you want to go to Egypt because there are some striking similarities. We're going to get into this and what Stephen said. There's a tie-in, but we are going to have Khemitology stroke Peru tour. The Khemitology people are coming to Peru this year.
Yeah, that's right. September 15th to October 2nd. We have a tour lined up with Stephen coming and also Yusuf and Patricia Awiyan and as well Gary Evans. So it's our Egypt group reassembling in Peru to compare and contrast the enigmas of both fascinating lands.
Wow. That's going to be surely interesting trip. I'm sure Yusuf, with his mindset for carving, is going to be pretty fascinated with the techniques there too.
Oh, I'm sure he is.
So Brien, tell me about any interesting places you've seen this time. Anything different?
In Egypt?
Yeah, in Egypt. I mean, did you do any different places this time, or did you find anything different about any place you went to this time?
I think just more detail. Again, I don't think anybody can visit a place once as profound as Egypt and really get, all that much out of it. It requires multiple visits. So I was doing my very best every single minute of every day to focus on each site, especially what's called Bu-Wizir, which is the land of Osiris, or the Giza Plateau area. That is my area of greatest fascination.
Wow.
And there I saw more and more examples of obvious technological achievement which the dynastic Egyptians could not have done. And so much of it is basically underground, which is intriguing. Mm-hmm. It alludes to the idea that probably, as I believe Stephen would concur, at least 80% of ancient Egypt is still buried in the sand, and that's where the mysteries have to be unraveled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In one respect, the things that get me is obviously the core drilling and the high speed drilling, these cores with the spiral grooves in them. And I love this stuff because I'm an engineer. But then you got this strange, mysterious, intent sometimes. For example, like you have, and this maybe ties in with Peru in a little way, but in the Sphinx Valley Temple, you have this giant black stone in amongst all the pink granite. What do you think of that one, Brien?
Well, the thing is, when we were there a year ago, Chris Dunn brought his precision measuring instruments, mm-hmm. especially a flat-edged ruler, which has a precision of within 2/10,000ths of an inch. And when he applied that to the stone surface of the black rock, it was completely flat. And so the other thing is that that surface of that stone was in astonishingly good shape compared to the rest of them. A lot of the pink granite seems to have crumbled on the surface, but that black piece looked very fresh, even though clearly it's many thousands of years old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a major anomaly, James.
Major anomaly.
All the stones in the Valley Temple are rose granite, except for this one stone, which is black granite. Mm. And some people think, was that added more recently? Because as Brien said, that stone is perfectly smooth polished, while the rose granite stones show much erosion and are pitted in rock. Why is that one different? One of the things we did find different this time, James, that we're going to add to our mix of what is chemitology, mm-hmm. is Yusuf and myself and a wonderful geologist who joined us on tour named Susan Moore. We found distinct evidence that the ancient Khemitologians may not have used machines to polish the stones. They may have used an abrasive liquid, like an acid. We found evidence at the Bent Pyramid. We found evidence on this stone that Brien has been talking about, this black granite stone. Mm-hmm. We found evidence in the Serapeum, on the boxes of the Serapeum, some type of a residue, some type of a chemical adhesion. This is alchemy. This is where alchemy came from. Mm-hmm. They may have used an abrasive, a liquid, to actually polish the stones and not machines. And that's one of the new things we looked at this time, and we found some distinctive evidence. So it's possible that this black granite stone had some liquid applied to it to make it highly polished, while the others did not. Mm-hmm. And again, what we find in ancient Kemet, there always was a reason for everything. There is a reason why they chose a particular stone for a particular place, why calcite is in one place, while black granite is in one, while rose granite is another. Everything had a reason. So there was a reason why this one stone is highly polished and the others not. We just don't know it. We can only speculate that it has to do with the overall resonance, because that's what we see mainly was done with the use of stone. Why stone was chosen for its particular crystalline quartz content is because of its resonance, ability to produce sound. So somehow one piece of black granite stone was significant to be at that position in the Valley Temple, but we don't know why. But again, we did find evidence this time that they used abrasives, liquid, alchemy to polish the stones, not machines.
Wow. Yeah, I have some video footage of that in the Serapeum, Stephen. It's absolutely fascinating. When you pointed it out to me, that you look at the shine and then when you go to the edge, it looks like the liquid spilled around the edge and there's drip marks. It looks like there's drip marks.
That's exactly what he pointed out to all of us. And even Susan Moore, again, the geologist, she agreed. And we found the same residue on the casing stones of the Bent Pyramid at Dashur. Wow. And she also agreed. It could be that they used some type of a liquid to polish the stone.
Wow. crazy as it sounds, it makes sense because there's evidence to visually look at where you can see the drip marks. It would explain why they were able to get mirror finishes, because all liquids are self-leveling.
Exactly.
Even when
good point.
Even in engineering today, when they put in massive manufacturing plants, they put in a self-leveling compound and the floor levels itself and it goes really, really hard then afterwards. Wow. And it just, of course,
what we're going to be looking at in this Peru tour, we've got Brien's eyes. We're now in Brien's backyard. We're going to be in his wheelhouse. This is his area. He knows what we're looking for. What we're going to look for with myself, with Yusuf and Patricia, is any signs that we can see of ancient Kemet in Peru, Bolivia. As Brien has said, as Chris Dunn has pointed out, as they are the two that have compared the sites, the machining looks different, perhaps same, maybe different in Peru, like at Pumapunku, for example, is one of the sites, of course, which is at the top of my bucket list. To look at the machining and the engineering of Pumapunku. What we know from Brien had said, what Chris Dunn had said, they don't see the obvious tool marks in Peru, Bolivia, like we see in Egypt. So we're going to look with our eyes, with our experience, with our background, with my archaeology background, to see if I can see any examples of ancient Kemet in Peru and Bolivia. Because it's significant with this find that we found, which I can discuss in detail if you'd like.
Of course, we do also have in Peru, Brien, some strange stones in the middle of walls as well, symbolic maybe, or, for example, on a much smaller scale, we have the Coricancha. There's a strange small stone about 1 inch that's slotted in to the masonry, and it just doesn't have any engineering function, maybe symbolic, Brien.
Well, as far as I can tell, the Coricancha, which is the epicenter of Cusco itself and was always the spiritual epicenter of the Inca world, it is what remains, I think, of the finest stone craftsmanship of an intact nature in all of Peru and Bolivia. As you said, the stones aren't all that large, but the precision there is literally multiple cases of where you cannot fit a human hair in between two stones of a wall that is 38 inches or roughly 1 meter thick.
No. Wow. Crazy precision, Brien. Crazy type precision. Of course, we're talking in Egypt, on the Khemitology tour, we're talking acoustics and megaliths. And of course, Brien, we have evidence in Peru of obviously megaliths, but also acoustics too, to some extent.
Exactly. You have the same phenomenon occurring, and that's something that, I think we especially want to touch on because, Yusuf is very much into vocalization and finding the right harmonic of the stone. He can hit a certain tone and make a room suddenly expand in volume in terms of sound. And in November, we had a woman who was an opera singer, and she was in the Coricancha with us.
Wow.
And when she would hit certain tones, or actually one tone, which I believe was either A or A sharp, we'll have to calibrate that. She was able to make the room expand in volume to such a significant amount that I could stand at the very opposite end of the building several hundred feet away, and her voice was incredibly audible.
Wow. Of course, Stephen, in acoustics in Peru, I think was it Sneferu pyramid means two tones, perhaps?
Double harmony, yes.
Double harmony.
And yes, and to add to what you guys have been saying, Yusuf Awayan not only is a master carver, a master chematologist, but he's a master musician. He has a tremendous ear for sound. We recorded, what we did in the Great Pyramid this time was the ultimate experience for me. Again, here I say to people, I tell people it never gets old for me. This was I've been going to Egypt for 22 years. It was my 17th trip, at least my 15th time. I've been inside the Great Pyramid over 25 times. This was the best experience. There is an antechamber that leads into the king's chamber. It's a small area where only two people can stand up. Yusuf and I stood in there, and it's a low bass tone that you have to hit. Yusuf knows the tone. If you would have been with us in the king's, I think you went in the king's chamber with Yusuf. He hits this tone where he knows the tone of the pyramid. And he knows the tone of every site he goes to. He has the instincts, he has the senses to do so. So it's a low bass tone. We hit an incredible amount of overtones. And this time also, it's like I said, I've been to Saqqara, maybe 20, 25 times in my lifetime. It cannot cover all there is at Saqqara. We went into tombs this time that I have never been in before, and this is where we found the evidence of a link between Peru and Egypt, if you'd like me to go there.
Oh, please do, Brien, or
okay.
Stephen.
This was on our extension, so this was not even the whole tour group. Unfortunately, didn't go in this. We'd like to take the whole group in maybe next year, but Brien was with us, of course, on the extension. These were Old Kingdom tombs. This is about, we'll say, the 5th dynasty. To date this is perhaps 2350, 2400 BCE. So we're looking about 4300, 4400 years ago. There was a tomb of a noble, an individual called Kergami. We're walking around. Now, this is important because coming to this tour, we had planned to do this. We've been talking about links between Peru and Kemet for some time with Brien. Now, Brien has researched the origin of the name. We're not saying this is where the name comes from. But however, Yusuf and I have been speaking for years that the term Per-U is a Commission term. Per means house. We talked about per netter, pyramid, per ka, tomb, per ba, temple. So per is house. So we know that the term in Commission per-E would be two houses. Mm-hmm. He showed us that glyph on the Giza Plateau. Mm-hmm. We also talked, before this tour even happened, that maybe there's the glyph Per-U, which would mean in Commission many houses. So you ask and you shall be received. Knock and it shall be answered for you. We found it. We found it in the tomb of Kergami. There is an inscription on the wall. I can send it to you. You could put it up on Capricorn Radio. It is amazing. Wow. It shows the term Per-U. Many houses is what it would mean in Commission. But not only that, there's an inscription there. And we had the beautiful thing of having accompanied with us Muhammad Ibrahim, who is our tour director of Do It Travel, and is also an expert Egyptologist and really an expert on glyphs. So he began to read the inscription for me. There was a term which is Her, which is a face that looks, it means direction. The actual inscription is Het Nun Peru. Het Peru Nun. So what it means is, it could mean the direction, Het, and it had the Tawi, which means many lands. So the inscription could be saying that the direction to the many lands of Peru is cross 4 waters. There was a sign for water, which is none, which is a squiggly line. It's also, people know it's a sign for Aquarius. 2 lines is the water bearer. Nothing is new. Everything came from Egypt. All these glyphs, all the signs, all the zodiac came from Egypt. So the water bearer has the sign for none, which is a squiggly line. But it was written 4 times. So it immediately came to me that the inscription is saying the direction to Peru from Kemet is across 4 waters. And the 4 waters would be the Nile, would be the Atlantic, would be the Pacific, and would be the Amazon. The 4 great. There's a reason why they wrote the water 4 times. This is what I discussed with Yusuf and with Muhammad. They could have just said it across the water and done the none once, but they wrote it 4 times. I believe they were saying it's across 4 waters. So again, what we're saying, if this is evidence, if this is distinctive evidence, it is saying that 4,300 years ago, the Commissions were already saying that they had been to Peru. So in other words, it is past. When that inscription was put on the wall, it had already happened. It was a historical event. So we're talking perhaps, only saying perhaps, over 10,000, 12,000 years ago, the ancient Commissions may have gotten to Peru. Mm-hmm. And here's the evidence that they put on the wall of the tomb for us. So we're going to be going to Peru now with Yusuf's eyes, with my eyes, with Patricia's eyes. We're going to be looking for any possible sign of ancient Kemet that we can find in Bolivia and Peru. And also on this tour, James, we found significant evidence that the Commissions had been to Australia. There are what are known in Australia as the Gosford glyphs.
Sure.
They're glyphs that appear on the wall in the outback. They're an isolated area. For years, many people, including myself, when I first saw them, thought they were fake. They were forgeries. They're just random signs that somebody had carved onto a wall. Well, no, it took Muhammad Ibrahim and Yusuf Awayan doing a very scholarly presentation for us on tour, so everybody on the tour got to see this, that proved that this was legitimate. The reason why they weren't is because it wasn't written by a scribe. It wasn't written by a professional who was used to writing the Commission language. It was written by a sailor who wasn't an expert in the language, but Muhammad clearly proved to us that the inscriptions were written by somebody who knew the language. Because it was talking about the death of his brother and it was a ceremony. So in other words, to make a long story short, we now have distinct evidence that the Khemitologians were in Australia, and now we're looking at distinct evidence that the Khemitologians were also in Peru.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm in touch with the guys, Stephen and Evan Strong. I've had them on the show, Stephen, Patricia's coming on to do a roundtable very, very soon as well. There's some interesting evidence coming up at the moment. There's also an ancient...
I'll tell you, this was one of the most scholarly presentations I ever saw. Wow. Muhammad was brilliant. He did an overlay of the Suf language, what we call the Suf, which is the Commission written language, over the inscriptions to show that the person was not expert in the language, had written some of the signs wrong, but knew the language. Whoever had written that knew the language. So there is distinct, and they're working on other inscriptions that are there now. And then again, Patricia will tell you, when you interview her, that she got the confirmation from an Aborigine elder, an elderly woman who told her that it's an Aboriginal story that two brothers had come from Egypt to Australia. One had died, and his other brother had made a memorial to his brother. So there was the indigenous confirmation, which is something that Hakim would have loved. He would have preferred that confirmation from an indigenous elder to some archaeologist saying it was legitimate. We did the same thing with showing that the Mayans were in ancient Egypt. It was an indigenous confirmation there. So we're looking now at what we call diffusionism, that, as it's been said, many, many people have used this quote. The oceans were not barriers, they were highways. And we're talking about highways over 12,000 years ago. And Brien has a lot of expertise in this too. This is why he adds a lot to this conversation, because he has experience as a mariner, as a sailor. He knows the trade winds. He knows it's possible to ride the winds all around this planet if you know the ocean currents.
That's true.
And I believe they knew that over 12,000 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I can't wait for the show with the glyphs because it's incredibly important. I think I've Laird Scranton coming on, Klaus Donna, Patricia Awayan, Hugh Newman, myself, and the guys in Australia as well. And there's also I'm not sure if you're familiar, Stephen, there's an ancient star map right beside the site as well. It's probably the largest star map in the world, giving something like 600 meters wide. You know, and that may be able to be, I'm working on that with the guys, and that may be able to be dated archaeoastronomy to give a date as well. So, it's an exciting site there, a lot of research to be done, yeah. I guess, Brien, to bring you back in, you're famous obviously for the elongated skulls. Did we see another tie-in between Egypt and elongated skulls, perhaps in statues or imagery?
Well, that's where, there's so much controversy about that subject, but Stephen and I are definitely in agreement on that. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of elongated skulls which have been found in Peru and Bolivia, and in general, they are literally the cone head shape. But in Egypt, the only evidence I've seen is in the art, in the statuary, in some of the inscriptions on walls, basically from the time of Akhenaten and the Amarna family. Yeah. But there have been no skulls found which look anything like skulls found in Peru. So it's in Egypt, it's in the art. In Peru, we will definitely be showing people many examples of elongated skulls, including at the Paracas History Museum, where I will take the skulls out of the cases. And with latex gloves on, people can handle them themselves. But it's one subject which Stephen and I are getting kind of tired of, where people say, well, the Egyptians had elongated skulls, and it's like, well, the art shows that, but as far as I know, Nefertiti has never been found. Akhenaten's mummy has never been found, and therefore, when people do these really overly simplistic comparisons, you really can't do it.
Yeah.
Well, sure. This was the beauty of bringing Brien to Egypt. Last year in 2013, we went into the mummy room and the Cairo Museum. So we saw the mother of Akhenaten, Tayi. We saw the skull that's supposed to be Akhenaten. We saw others of the families, and so Brien could look and see the difference in the skulls. But he's right. There is a real mystery here. Now, Brien is looking at this culture of the Paracas people, which I don't believe he thinks go back further than 2,000 years ago. However, if we're looking at the statuary of Akhenaten and the Amarna family, that's 3,500, 3,400, 3,300 years ago. And yet the mystery is, why are they being depicted this way, with these clearly elongated skulls that look like the Paracas skulls, and yet they did not actually physically have these skulls? So that were they trying to identify with some previous people? And again, Akhenaten allowed this to happen. So this is significant. If his artisans had drawn these things and he was disagreeing with it, of course we wouldn't have the evidence. He would have said, no, destroy these things. That's not how we look. He allowed himself and Nefertiti and the family to be portrayed that way. So there is a mystery there. But we want, again, Brien and I have been, and as he said, it's been getting kind of tedious and tiresome for us. Over and over, ad nauseum, we have to keep saying, no, Akhenaten did not have elongated skull. Nefertiti nor Tut did not have an elongated skull. However, they were portrayed that way. So that is the mystery. And the mystery would be way back in prehistory in Kemet, because this is not the Paracas people we're talking about. They couldn't be identifying with them if they only go back 2,000 years, and we're talking about Akhenaten 3,300 years ago. There had to be perhaps a previous African people with elongated skulls that Akhenaten was allowing his family to be identified with. That's speculation. But the actual evidence, no, there are no elongated skulls in Egypt yet found that look anything like the Paracas skulls that Brien has been investigating.
And actually, sorry, but if I could just interject here.
Sure.
Recent evidence suggests that the Paracas actually go back 3,500 years ago.
Wow, that's great news.
Wow.
So there's a possible connection. Maybe it's just in the art. No one knows where the Paracas people came from. They suddenly seem to have appeared on the coast 3,500 years ago, possibly farther back in time. But that, of course, is why we're conducting the DNA and carbon-14 testing of the skulls, because even academics internationally don't know the exact origins or timeline of the Paracas, but it's generally been agreed now that they go back at least 3,000 years, some say 3,500.
And that makes them contemporary with the Amarna family, and that's significant.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah, Brien, we still have to do a show with L.A. Marzulli, and I know you guys are up to your neck in research on all fronts at the moment. Where's the research at today with that, Brien, just briefly?
With
anything interesting in elongated skulls at the moment? Any DNA analysis?
Well, actually, L.A. left 2 days ago. He was here for we had a tour for 10 days. His emphasis is more on the biblical Nephilim aspect.
Sure.
So we had a tour group, and we went through Paracas and Ica, Nazca. We looked at the Ica Stone Museum. Then we went to the oldest ceremonial city known of by carbon-14 testing in the Americas, called Corral. And then after the tour group left, then our Peruvian archaeologist, L.A., and myself explored the oldest cemetery of the Paracas, called Chongos, because we're looking to have, through the Peruvian government, an archaeological dig, again working in 100% symmetry with the Peruvian government, because we would like to do one or two excavations in order to remove, hopefully, some royal mummies from the area before the tomb robbers, who are very active in the area, before they're able to get access to what is left of the ancient Paracas. For myself, I'm not a big fan of pulling, royal dead people out of the ground, but either these people are removed so that they can be studied and preserved, or they will be victims of the plunder of the local tomb robbers, who literally rip the tombs to pieces, cast the bones and skulls aside, and just destroy the archaeology of the area. Yeah,
it's a catch-22, Brien. I know that. I guess, Stephen, let's talk about Akhenaten, because you mentioned Akhenaten. What an incredibly interesting guy. He gets a lot of bad press. I think this guy was a pioneer in a way, Stephen.
Well, there are many different traditions to talk about Akhenaten. As I wrote in my book, From Light into Darkness, there are Rosicrucians. In Judaism, there's all sorts of connections to Akhenaten. So certain groups revere him and place him on a pedestal. There even was a woman named Annie Besant, who actually Alice Bailey, who was part of the Theosophical movement, who channeled the great ascended master Kutumi. Kutumi mentioned that there had been 34 Christs on our planet, Jesus being the 34th, and he mentioned Akhenaten as being the 33rd.
Wow.
And I actually mentioned in my book that there would not have been a Moses, there would not have been a Jesus, there would not have been a Muhammad if it wasn't for Akhenaten. So he fits in that level. But so much misunderstanding has been written about him that he didn't invent monotheism. He didn't invent the Aten religion. What he wanted to do was return to a time when there were no priests, there were no priesthoods, there were no Hanuti, as we call them, that everybody individually could have a personal connection with the deity, with the divine, didn't need to have formal practices. So he wanted to return to the previous cycle. We're in now the cycle of Imen, which is the cycle of darkness, where things are hidden and separated. The cycle before was Iten, which is the term he used in his title, Aten, the shadow of the wiser. It meant full enlightenment. So he wanted everybody to return to a point where you didn't need priests, you didn't need someone to lead you to the deity, but he's the most misunderstood person in Egyptian history, and perhaps in all history, and most of the things written about him are terribly wrong and inaccurate. And we've tried to clear that up over the years. But we are featuring next year in our tour to Egypt, 2015, we're going to Amarna. So all people who have a feeling of a connection to Akhenaten, we're going to discuss Akhenaten. And again, one of the 4 things we found this time tied into my book, From Light into Darkness, to the specific of Akhenaten. Akhenaten had 2 viziers. The viziers, vizier is a Turkish word, wazir. It means like the second in command, the prime minister. The vizier was like the one who handled everything for the so-called king. So he had 2 of them. One was named Ramos, or Ramisu, and the other was controversial. So I wrote in my book that the myth of Moses, which is based on the work of a student of Sigmund Freud named Otto Rank, he wrote, his thesis was the myth of the great man, saying that people that we have in history, like a Jesus, like a Moses, like a Muhammad, are actually more than one historical person whose life is fused into the myth. So the myth contains more than one person. As I mentioned, the myth of Moses may have actually been 3 people fused in. Akhenaten himself was part of the myth of Moses. And this vizier, Ramos, who's Ramisu, which is where the name Moses comes from. But it was his second vizier, whose tomb was only found in 1986 at Saqqara by a French Egyptologist named Alain Zivy. He found it, and he came up with a title for this vizier, Upper Eel. Nobody challenged him. He was well respected in the field. He has since passed away. Nobody challenged him, but the term eel is found nowhere. So we were looking for years. I've been trying to get in this tomb. This tomb is closed. To make a long story short, we went in the Saqqara Museum, Imhotep Museum. There was a display for this character, Upper Eel, and there was a baton that had his inscription on it. I got Muhammad Ibrahim, master of hieroglyphs, to come and read it, and he read it properly. And it is as Hakim predicted it would be. The title of this vizier was Ibrahiyya. There's no eel, no L anywhere. Everybody thought the Semitic term for God was, no, he just read, this Egyptologist Zavi read the name wrong. It's Ibrahiyya, which I believe is the origin of Abraham, where the myth of Abraham. So we have connected to Akhenaten. One vizier definitely was part of the origin of the myth of Moses. The other vizier may have been Abraham. This vizier may have led the followers of Akhenaten out of Egypt, which is the Exodus. As I point out in From Light into Darkness, what the Exodus was, as Hakim taught us, was the followers of Amen chasing the Aten followers of Akhenaten out of Egypt. That was the Exodus. They later became the Israelites, later became the Jews. Mm-hmm. But and Akhenaten was connected by lineage to Hebrew. Wow. So the whole idea is then that this vizier who was found in his body may have been the myth. He was the father of the Jews. Ibrahim means literally the father of the one who crossed the river. And actually, this was the 4th important thing we found. We now retranslated the title. Muhammad, who's not afraid to stand up to his colleagues, and was now willing to go on record that the title has been wrong, and they've been using it wrong, and they knew it was wrong. They've just kept it because it's like an old boys club. They didn't want to speak about this Egyptologist since passed away, but he read the name wrong. It's Ibrahiyya, which I believe is the origin of the name Ibrahim, or Abraham.
Wow.
So Akhenaten is an amazing story. We're going to go into detail on the tour in 2015 because we're going to Amarna. We're going to go to the site of the city he fed up. I'll go into detail about how significant he was. But again, this was one of the great finds where I got Muhammad to actually find the inscription, translate it properly, and agree that it was Egyptologists have it wrong.
I'm there, Stephen. I'm going on the tour. If you're going to Amarna, I'm going.
We're going to do 2 full days, and Muhammad is saying we're going to go to not just Amarna, but there was other areas that are part of what was the city of Akhenaten. Tunal El Jabal, Ishmonim. We're going to go to all these sites, and Beni Hassan, all of those areas that are connected to Amarna.
Wow, beautiful. Of course, Stephen, I read out at the very start of the show, a hypothetical question, well, rhetorical, I should say, where the pyramids energy machines? And I have sat inside the granite box that's in the King's Chamber myself. I'm 6'2.5", 6'3". I had 3 inches to spare between myself and the top of the box, lying down flat. And I chanted an Om and resonated within the cavity, which then resonated the whole chamber. It was
and
one of,
Yusuf tone for you.
And it was one, I was there with Gary Evans and Jana,
okay.
But, Yusuf wasn't there. But it was one of the most transcendental experiences I've ever had. And I've been on ayahuasca and many other things in Peru and exploring myself. But this was just a natural acoustic setting. This thing is an energy machine. You can go in today and use this today still.
James, I want to follow up on that. When I went into this antechamber with Yusuf, and this has been recorded, and we have to get this recording out for everyone to see. We had a fellow with us from Australia, Tony Deej, a wonderful engineer, mining engineer, who brought this very sophisticated recording, portable recording device with him, and he recorded us. We hit I've experienced what you have. I will say to you that the most complete out-of-body experiences I've ever had in my life have been in the box.
Yeah.
But toning with Yusuf, we turned and faced each other. We hit the same exact tone. That tone came together and then spiraled upward. And a spiraling is always counterclockwise because that's how energy moves. It spiraled upward and it rammed the whole pyramid, went into a resonance I've never heard. James, I can only say to you what I said to everybody then. The only comparison I can have to it is like the times when I was on acid.
Exactly.
Without the drug. I went into an altered state where I was no longer there. There was only the sound. There was no people, there was no bodies, there were no humans, there was only the sound of the pyramid making this incredible harmonic tone. So yes, and it was not specifically designed that way. We can experience that today. However, we do believe the acoustic energies produced by the Great Pyramid kept the ancient Cometians' immune systems at the highest possible level could be. No viruses, no bacteria. We believe the ancient Cometians lived hundreds of years. They are the source of the patriarchs of the Old Testament. Methuselah 900 years, Enoch 365 years. We believe the ancient Cometians lived hundreds of years because the sound, the whole civilization was bathed in infrasound. It was the sound that kept the immune systems at the highest level of operation and kept, as you experienced, as I experienced, people perpetually high.
Perpetually high in a nice, natural, blissful state. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't believe the power of that thing, Stephen, that pyramid. I could not believe the power of that. That you can resonate your lungs with your mouth inside the cavity and the whole pyramid vibrates and you just leave your body, your consciousness just dissipates into whatever.
But it was everything they did, because Brien can tell you that Yusuf Awiyan in 2013 led him down 3 levels under the Giza Plateau. He could have been down 300 meters. That's how far some of these tunnels go. And in the tunnels, even down there, you have the same resonance. Brien?
That's completely true. That was the last day that I was in Egypt last year. And Yusuf, in the way he works, which I love, is that he simply said, "Follow me," and I wandered like a puppy behind him, and then we were going into places that tourists don't go, and we started to go underground on the Giza Plateau. We wound up going 3 levels down. If we had had more time, we could have gone deeper and farther. So I was witness to the shaft and tunnel system, which according to Abdel Hakim Awiyan is massive in scale. It goes on for many miles north, south, east, and west, connects many of the ancient sites together underground. And so I'm very much looking forward to going back next year, where hopefully we'll have even more access to spaces and places that conventional archaeologists don't recognize exist. But we physically, and that's the great thing about going on tour, is we physically get to go into places which almost nobody on the planet knows about.
Wow, for sure. I guess we're coming up 50 minutes now. We've got another 10 minutes, guys. I have to mention the Serapeum because What an awesome place. I know the Serapeum had been closed for a long time. I mean, this thing, it was one thing I had to go and see. I just made sure I went to the Serapeum. Yusuf took me around. I've got some great footage with Yusuf. I'm still processing the hours of footage I got with Yusuf early on. But Yusuf took me round and showed me these boxes, guys. I mean, these things are abnormal. They're abnormal for their size, but they're abnormal for their location in tight rooms.
It's amazing you got to experience that, James. That is now perhaps one of the highlights of our tours. As you mentioned, the Serapeum was just been open to the public in September of 2013. I went in there with Hakeem in 97. Of course, if you had access, you could go in there. Chris Dunn was able to go in there in the 2000s getting access from Zahi Hawass researching for his book. But unless you could get special permission, and majority of Egyptologists have never been in the Serapeum. So I've been in there 4 times now. It is amazing. But James, what we now believe is there were many Serapeums. It is not unique. They now believe there's a Serapeum in Alexandria.
Wow.
We believe this Serapeum may have had another level underneath. For people to understand what the Serapeum is, it's an underground tunnel carved straight through limestone bedrock where are these niches. And in these niches are stone boxes, which are incorrectly called sarcophaguses. They're not sarcophagus because no one was ever buried in them. It's the same with the sarcophaguses in the Valley of the Kings. Their original intent was never for burial. They're resonance boxes. But we have found today 33 niches, 27 intact. So there were 27 boxes that we know of. Some have been destroyed. Tomb robbers, even from Auguste Mariette, Egyptologists went in there and destroyed it, looking for something inside. Nothing was ever found in these boxes. Nothing. Some of the lids were sealed up until modern times, been removed in the last 50 to 100 years. Nothing has ever been found in these boxes. And yet, as you've mentioned, this is where Chris Dunn said was the smoking gun, where he brought his most finely tuned level to 2/10,000ths of an inch, went inside one of the black granite boxes, which is perfectly polished on the inside as well as the outside, and found no deviation when he shined a light under this level at 2/10,000ths of an inch.
Sure.
So that's at least its precision. So why? Again, when somebody like Chris Dunn says, there has to be a reason. You don't do this, and you as an engineer, you know this as well as anyone. You don't do this type of precision and tolerance without a reason. You're not doing it for esoteric reasons. You're not doing it to look fancy and pretty, because you could do a lot more to make it look fancy and pretty if it was just done for that. It's done for a purpose, for a reason, for function. And the function is definitely resonance. Not only is the material important, why is there a black granite block here? Why next to it is a rose granite block, then another rose granite block, then a gray granite block? Why? The order of the boxes is important, the material is important, and the geometry is important. The actual cuts, the design. Everything had a reason, a function. This is the most amazing thing. We use that as one of the highlights that we advertise for people. We are going to go into the Serapeum with our groups, and we are going to explain it like no one else does and show it like no one else does. And we also believe, James, that it was not unique, that there were many Serapeums. So that's why, as Chris Dunn calls the Great Pyramid a power plant, I call the Serapeum a power station. And there were many of them.
For sure. You know, Stephen, that's the thing. I brought, knowing my engineering as well, I brought a straight edge. It was a small one, and I brought the LED light as well, because I literally just wanted to see it for myself. I don't question Chris's techniques. I just wanted, it's like the Sistine Chapel. Sometimes you just need to go and see it. You can look at all the pictures or all the TV you want. So I did the same thing. I spoke to Chris when I came home, and I said, Chris, that is mind blowing. Chris actually wants to do a show with me just on the Serapeum alone.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm gonna do that.
Go in detail with him like nobody else.
Exactly, you know, and this guy, you know, he's done a wealth of knowledge for ancient Egypt with the techniques. This guy, had Chris not come along to Egypt to do this, I mean, you know, we would be backward in thinking. We would be definitely backward.
James, if you remember the interview that we had, which I recommend everybody see, that you did with me on the porch of the Awayan house, when we talked about Hakeem predicted to me in the 90s that we would need a Chris Dunn and a Robert Schoch for this field. He said then we need somebody to look at this with the ideas of manufacturing, of technology, of engineering. Before Chris we even knew about Chris's name. And then he said we would need the geologists to be able to look at what we're looking at in the terms of geology. And there came Robert Schoch. And now we have Susan Moore, who is now the geologist for the Kemet School. She came with us to a wonderful person. came with no ego. She knew so much more geology than we did. She knew so much more about rocks than we did, but she didn't play it up. She calmly listened to us and said, well, I think this is natural erosion. I think this is this. And she shared openly and freely like we like to do. We don't try to hold anything back to anybody. And so she was a perfect member of us. And this is beautiful, James, because as we were going along, as it started, as a typically academically trained geologist, she's explaining everything we're showing her as a means, as a function of natural erosion. We go out to the Middle Kingdom sites of Harara and El Lahoun, where we see limestone that has metal, iron precipitate coming out of the stone. So she looked at that and we said, what was that? She said, well, this could be natural process. It would take millions of years. So she's then saying she thinks that the Khemitologists actually took a stone that was eroded with iron coming out of it, and used it. We didn't agree with that, but we let her go. She kept going on and on. Everything is natural erosion until we brought her to the Temple of Karnak. At the Temple of Karnak, we have a phenomenon there which we knew she couldn't explain. We have an area of black granite that is crumbling from within, from the inside out, not the surface, from inside the stone. It is crumbles to the hand like dust. We looked at Susan. What do you think? She said, I have no idea. Simply, honestly, straightforward with all her background. I'm going to take samples. I'm going to analyze it, but I have no possible explain this by natural erosion. And why it's at one area and there's other black granite around it, which is not eroded. So we, of course, are intimating that the energy used at the temple, the energy used at the site that causes. So she then had to rethink what she told us beforehand. Well, maybe what she saw earlier at the other site was not a function of natural erosion, but could be by high energy that's being worked at the site that causes. But we got her. And we got her at Abu Sir also, because at Abu Sir there's also basalt. One basalt block which is crumbling to the stone and crumbling from within. The basalt block right next to it is not crumbling. So this is not natural erosion. Erosion is uniform. If it's occurring naturally, it occurs all over uniformly. It cannot just be one block and a block next to it is not eroded. That's not natural erosion. That is something unnatural. Energy is causing that. She now is testing the stones for us, and she now came around. At the end of the tour, she was agreeing with it. She agreed that the age of the Sphinx, by geology, is over 30,000 years. She totally agreed with Robert Schoch about that. And she agreed with us that something was going on at the site which caused reaction to the stone, which cannot be explained by normal geological processes. That's all we needed to hear from her. That's all we needed to hear from her. She's now totally on board with us. She's coming back next year, 2015, and bringing other geologists with her.
Wow.
She's called Egypt Geologist Heaven.
For sure, exactly, for sure. Brien, do you want to add to the Serapeum? Any views?
Well, I would have to say that the Serapeum and the interior of the Great Pyramid and Abu Sir are my favorite places because they're so incredibly mysterious. I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to go south into Upper Egypt again, because there you see the great, wonderful work of the dynastic Egyptians. And because we did the Buwizir Giza area first, it's easy, I think, for almost anyone to see that there's something very different about the Giza area. And that's because that's where we find so many enigmas that don't make sense according to what conventional Egyptology speaks about. When we see some of the temples at Karnak and etc., we see, sure, you know, that people with bronze tools, if you had a large group of workers, they could have constructed those temples out of limestone or even sandstone. But when you go inside the Serapeum and you see these rows of 100-ton boxes where the lid and the box are always from the same piece of stone, you are almost in a science fiction set. Not only that, it isn't simply the fact that that there is precision in terms of how the boxes were finished. There were also a number of dips and, areas in some of these boxes that were as highly polished as the flat surfaces. So, the Serapeum, I think, is an example of a place which defies Western logic, and that's why it's so intriguing, because they sit there. Supposedly, you can't even turn, if you wanted to remove some of the boxes, you couldn't get them around the corners out of their niches. So that gives a real surreal nature to one aspect of the surreal nature of ancient Egypt that no other tour group or experts, as far as I can tell, can show, and that's what makes the Kemet School, Khemitology.com, unique, and I think they are the finest organization and the only people I would ever visit Egypt with.
Sure. Thank you, Brien. I'm glad you said that. The Khemitology.com. You can get onto the website and catch them on Facebook. The group is exciting because you can see what happens on the tours there as well. Of course, Brien, your own website is hiddenincatours.com, and we can catch the Peru tour there. When's the dates for the Peru tour?
September 15th to October 2nd is the main tour.
Yep.
But before that, we have a 4-day tour of Nazca and Paracas and Ica. And then at the end of the main tour, we have basically Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. So all the details are on the website, especially on my blog, because each one of my blogs, which I do almost daily, includes the 2 main tours we're doing this year at the bottom.
Wow, fascinating, Brien. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate your input today, Brien, and you, Stephen. I would
also tell people, James, on Brien's site, Hidden Inca Tours, there is a sub-site, hiddenincavadeos.com. Just click on his videos. He has wonderful little videos he's done from all over Peru, Bolivia, and he did both years in Egypt with me, with Yusuf, with all people being interviewed. Wonderful videos. Some people can't read. They don't get it from reading. They don't get it from articles. But you look at these videos, the videos he did in the Serapeum, in Dendara, in the Great Pyramid, under the tunnels. He did great videos, and I recommend everyone go see them.
Sure. Hidden Inca videos. Yeah. Seeing is believing, as they say, Stephen. Exactly. You know, guys, I'm really excited about this Peru tour because we have Khemitology coming to Peru. Stephen, you're there. Patricia and Yusuf Awiyan and yourself, Brien. It's going to be exciting. It really is going to be exciting because the tables have turned and the focus is on Peru this time. And I think the people that's involved there have all got their own area of interest, their own keen eyes and their own expertise to all come together in a think tank type, philosophy. That's what I like to think about as guys. And, I think that's what happens at Khemitology as well. It's like a think tank of philosophical origins and engineering and science and ancient technology. It's wonderful. It really is wonderful.
That's why we love these tours so much. It's the group, it's the people who seek us out and decide to come with us. And so many of them add so much to the mix, so much to the information we find. We like we say, we're all teachers. We all look for people to find things and point it out to us. And we're open to discuss anything.
Well, I thank you for your time today, guys.
Always a pleasure, James.
Always a pleasure, James.
You too, Brien.
Same here, Brien.
You bet.